full of glass. You never say it's easy, I can't believe what I want. The movement you crave is late. Absent mind brings a hand to your face when you start to lie. You start to lie.
Coming to the screening of This Is Exile, it's the Yorkshire premiere, and it forms part of a duo of films being shown here and at the Human Rights Action Centre in London, which is the Amnesty Action Centre. And this is a collaboration, an informal one, between Save the Children and Amnesty International UK. And we're basically putting on this film screening to raise awareness of refugee issues, which is particularly pertinent at this time, and to fundraise for Save the Children and Amnesty International Leeds, particularly the refugee subgroup.
قبل ما تصير الأوضاع إننا عايشين مكيفين، أكل شرب ماي نلعب، يعني ما فينا شيء.
يعني سألت يعني ليش في هاي الأوضاع، يعني ليش؟
ما بعرف، ما سألت، هذا حكي كبار مو حكي صغار.
So we'll make a start. So this is the panel that we've got here this evening, and I'm very, very grateful and honoured to be chairing the panel as well. So first up, we've got Razzan Ghazzawi. She is a Syrian activist, researcher and freelance journalist who's recently done some work international. Razzan is Leeds-based as well, unlike the next participant, Alaistair at Roxburgh, who's come up from London today. He is the head of Humanitarian and conflict campaigns at Save the Children. So thank you very much for coming today, Alaistair. And finally, last but not least, Abdou Sidibe, who works with the Children's Society and is a trustee at PAFRAS and has a wealth of experience working with refugees in Leeds. So an excellent panel, and I really hope that this will be a fruitful conversation. So I'd quite like to start with Alaistair. I guess you've come the furthest, so we'll start with you. Could you just give us a bit of background in your work with refugees and with Save the Children, and a kind of general perspective on what is happening?
Yeah, so as you'll see from the credits at the end, Save the Children funded This Is Exile to be produced, and the reason why we did that is we've been responding to, I'm not sure what better word to describe it than crisis, humanitarian disaster in Syria over the last just over 5 years now, and what's been unfolding there and in the region around it. And each year has gone by, and each year the crisis has grown and has deepened, and more people's lives are affected, and the lives of children and their futures are becoming more and more compromised, and the risks that they're facing are growing day by day. And what we saw last summer with the sort of the refugee crisis emerging as people made that journey across the Mediterranean is really sort of a symptom of those growing problems that have been happening over the last 5 years, with people being forced to flee, forced from their homes, forced from their schools, no access to education, no likelihood of getting well-paid work, a lack of opportunities, a lack of hope going forward, and people have felt forced to then make that move onwards in search of those things that they've lost as well. And Save the Children's been really pushing to find a solution to this, a solution which is long-term, which is sustainable, and that has the best interests of those affected by this conflict at the heart of it. And what we've seen is two sorts of crises emerged from sort of one. So you originally had the conflict in Syria, and then that has grown into this refugee crisis, which isn't just of Syrians fleeing conflict and war, but it's many others fleeing war and persecution and poverty as well. And so we're faced now with a challenge unprecedented probably in the vast majority of our lifetimes, a refugee crisis greater than any seen since the end of the Second World War, a conflict that, whilst there's glimmers of hope, and I say that very carefully, that sort of the hope is slim at the moment, that there's negotiations that could progress and find a solution to end the conflict as well. But it is one of the great humanitarian challenges of our time. And it's one that I want us to be able to look back on in 50 years' time and say, we did all we could. And right now I don't think we can say that as an international community looking from the outside. I don't think we can. And we need to do more. We need to take steps urgently to give the children of Syria hope for the future.
شو أنا بفهم بالسياسة كلها أنت ما بتفهم بشيء.
شو مفكر لحالك يعني؟
لكن احنا رئيسنا أكبر رئيس. بس لا.
تضرب؟
لا.
تضربني عشان واحد؟
لك تعال حبيبي، هذا مو واحد، لك هذا مجمع الدولة كلياتها هو.
طيب إذا سبيت على الشارع أصله معك مسدس تقوسني؟
إيه قوسك.
شايفيني قوسني لو معه مسدس.
We'll move on to Abdou and then Razzan before taking questions from everyone here. So, Abdou, could you give us a local perspective on the issues that we've been looking at in the film and the issues that Alaistair touched on?
Yeah, so I work for the Children's Society, so we're a national organisation, and we've got a project here in Leeds where we support specifically asylum-seeking and refugee children and young people. And I think what's striking from the film really is that you hear the voices of the young people throughout the film really. And I guess for me what strikes me is the fact that the lack of voice, initially, so if you think about the debate, in the media, you remember the picture of, the little boy, Aylan Kurdi. And actually that's the only picture really where you start thinking about the impact of the refugee crisis. And like it was mentioned earlier, the conflict isn't just in Syria. There are other children fleeing persecution, war, human rights abuses. So in terms of young people who work with in Leeds, there are some from Eritrea, from Iran, from Syria as well, from Afghanistan, where the conflict hasn't ended there either. There are young people from Albania as well. So there's a diversity and a wide range of issues that children and young people are going through really. And in terms of the support we offer, it tends to be advocacy support, one-to-one support, because those who are coming here claiming asylum haven't been given a decision on whether they're going to be staying in the country. So I guess the film represented the young people in refugee camps. Then we saw that little girl settling in Switzerland, but there were many others coming here where there's no determination on whether they're going to be staying in Leeds and settling there or not. So there is that fear still of being sent back to your country. And actually the immigration debate is unhealthy and unhelpful in that sense really, where too many of those young people, their families are being sent back, or the Home Office is trying to send them back. And we also work with young people who are unaccompanied. So from Sudan, for example, come here on their own, have lost family members, may have gone through persecution, torture themselves, and trying to settle here, and they're being looked after by the local authority. But then again, they're being granted status until the age of 17 and a half, where again at the age of 18, rather than celebrating becoming an adult, it's the fear of whether you're going to be staying in this country.
استني ماما لا تفلتيها. نطلع ننزح من بلدنا نهجر. هلا نحن كل عائلتنا كل واحد بديرة. عالم عم تموت وعالم قاعدة وما همها شيء. ما حدا حاسس.
Could you tell us a bit about your perspective on the process and any other views that you have that are founded from your research or your freelance work?
So I'm actually a blogger. I did some freelance journalist work. But actually, I've been in the past 2 years trying to get over the previous 3 years, so I haven't been focused mostly on my well-being, mostly than anything else. Recently, I've been here doing my master's in gender studies, so this is also giving me a chance to kind of focus as well. But actually, I wanted to just maybe have some observations of on the whole situation. But I think it's very important to shed light on the political struggle of the people, because it started.
Hold the microphone nearer to your mouth.
Oh, is that okay? Sorry about that. So yeah, I mean the whole root of the problems is because the people who protested peacefully in 2011, because of the uprising that spread across the region, started in Tunisia and Egypt, and it spread into Syria, which was a revolutionary move for the people who could not dare to even imagine a different future in Syria against Assad regime, which was dominating the country over the 40 years, and protested peacefully. But with the war, with this demands of freedom, of dignity, and social justice, have been responded with war, of mass detention, of torture in detention, of chemical weapons in 2013, which led to the death of 1,400 people in 10 minutes, of hunger, as we've seen in Sanaya and others. So the government of Assad has responded with war, and this has led to the influx, mostly as well to the chaos that happened in the country, which enhanced the position of ISIS. So this whole political context, I think we should not forget from the narrative of what's called as Europe crisis, because it's a crisis for refugees, first of all. It has been kind of seen as a crisis for Europe, which is why it's been a lot of deals right now with Turkey, mostly recently last month, that in order for Turkey to minimize the number of refugees, have been promised to give 6 billion euros, as well as to lift the restrictions of visa for Turkish nationals. Even though it's important to also say that this has led to a crisis for Europe, because in the past 5 years, the regional countries have been the ones, like Jordan, Turkey, and Lebanon, have been the ones who are mostly accepting refugees, but also in very deteriorating conditions, like we've seen in the documentary, that the families are paying money for the landlords to stay. And also there have been hosts in refugee camp. The Palestinian, in Shatila, for example, is a Palestinian camp. So the hosting communities are either private ones, they're paying for the landlords, or they're going to refugee communities. So there has not been a substantial, a hosting community for the refugees, except in Turkey. But in Turkey, what they have done is that they used the refugees to make these deals with the European Union. So what the answer should be is how to respond. What we should respond is to push the governments of Europeans to host the refugees, is to open borders, and to also counter the rising racist discourse that has been prevalent as well among right-wing people, basically. Yeah.
نحن نقلنا لأنه صاحب الأرض كل نهار بيجي لعند أبوي ببناء بده مصاري كل نهار. قال له أبوي أنا ما معي مصاري، وعلى هاي الحال بلشوا بدك تعطيني وما بعرف وبلشوا يتقاتلوا. يعني لو ما فكرتوا العالم كانوا ضاربوا بعض بالشارع.
So we'll open up to a Q&A if anyone has any questions for anyone on the panel. If not, I can launch one. So in the film it seemed that there was quite a clear message that life would be better in the end if children could return to Syria, but there was still the idea that came across very strongly that life in Europe was better now. Does anyone, maybe Abdou, do you see that it's been the case in Leeds? Is it a great is it a great place to be as a refugee now?
Yeah, I mean, Leeds has a great history of welcoming, refugees and asylum seekers, and in the backdrop of the crisis, Leeds has, voluntarily wanted to welcome more families and welcome 200 families from Syria and also Afghan families. But there's also, some of the young people that are also in Calais. Some of them have, managed to come to the UK and arrive in Kent, for example. And Kent is under a lot of pressure where there's up to 1,000 young people who are actually there. And, social service can't really cope with that. So Leeds has, taken on a few of the young people then to release the pressure. And there's a great refugee community here. There's community organisation. There's a Syrian community. There's a Sudanese community. There's voluntary organisation that work and have great experience working in refugee communities in Leeds, really. So it has a great history, but it's patchy across the UK, I think. So there's other areas where there isn't the expertise and where there's lack of support, I'd say. I think in Leeds it's really good, yeah.
ولا تعذيب، أنا ما راح أقدر أعذب. قد ما قتلوا فينا حبيت إني أقتل منهم.
So we're being asked what is being done on the ground in the different communities for children, particularly suffering with mental health problems.
So there's a number of different things being done so first of all, it's very important to remember on this sort of big macro scale, a lot of what's being done is making sure children are getting the essential services, the essential needs of life, so food, water, education and healthcare as a first basic priority, because that's needed before any sort of further psychological support can be really truly beneficial. And then it's programs run by a number of agencies trying to provide psychological support, counselling support as well. And that's being run by multiple different agencies all around. And one of the big challenges, particularly in somewhere like Lebanon, is I think people's traditional picture of refugee camps is it's one camp and everyone's together in one big space. So many of you have seen the pictures of Zatri, the camp in Jordan, the absolute huge one, which looks like a massive city. Now it's absolutely massive, but the majority of refugees aren't living in camps like that, living in communities, as you saw in the film as well. So making sure children are having access to this support is a massive challenge, and also making sure that they're registered to get that support as well, because a lot are for whatever reason they're either not registered and so don't get perhaps the support they need or alike. And so it's a combination of making sure these children are getting the basic services they need, getting support, that specialist support where they can, and that's run through primarily through different NGOs, but also some of the UN agencies as well. And then finally making sure that they're registered so they're getting that support through, and that people know they're there and that they know they need that support as well.
هيك جات الفكرة يعني؟
إيه.
بس برأيك عادي سهل؟
لا أكيد ما له سهل.
ليش مو سهل؟
لأنه أحيانا الواحد ما بيقدر يقتل، في عالم النمل ما بتقدر تقتله.
Fundraising is always important. There's always been a huge gap in terms of the funding for helping respond to this crisis. There was a conference in London in February on the Syria crisis, and that raised a huge amount of money. It raised just over $10 billion in one day. Now, apparently that was the biggest single amount of money raised in one day in human history, but it wasn't enough. It didn't meet the appeal needs that had been set. It wasn't enough to meet the needs of refugees there as well. So there's a fundraising element to that space as well. But I think over and above this, and I always say this as a campaigner, is more campaigning is needed. The British government can do more. We need to change the public narrative here in the UK as well. As I think we all touched on in different ways. There's a very challenging public and very worrying public narrative around refugees at the moment. And we need to challenge that, we need to speak out, we need to share sort of films like this one so people can learn more about the situation faced by people. And we need to be pushing our government to make sure they are helping find a peaceful solution to the conflict, that they are ensuring that they themselves and the international community is doing all it can to support refugees, and that the UK government itself, here in the UK, is resettling refugees, they're reuniting families, and making sure children are getting the support they need.
Yeah, I mean, if you're from the area, I'd say, volunteering. Again, I mentioned earlier, there's lots of organisations here who are very keen, to get volunteers to try to support the work that they do. The children, young people we work with are desperate to improve their English, having the opportunity to make friends, so befriending, mentoring. So the University of Leeds, is very active in that sense. Again, fundraising is really important because locally it is difficult to find funding to support refugees and asylum seekers. They're not necessarily a priority within the city when you take into consideration other issues around poverty and the government cuts actually that affect all local authorities. So fundraising is definitely helpful to maintain some of the good services that are in the area. And also, like I said, spread the word really and try and challenge those stereotypical ideas about why asylum seekers are coming here, who refugees are. And I feel almost the word has lost its meaning really. And actually an asylum seeker, it's someone who's seeking safety, and it's going back to the basic really, but that's lost that meaning to the point that now in school, refugee is used as an insult. We get young people telling us about, coming from Somalia and being, insulted as being, terrorists, for example. So we really have a responsibility to actually educate our children to understand, who are those young people, those children who are coming here, why are they coming all the way here? And like the film says, they're not, if they had a choice, they would go back to their country, but if it was safe. But that's not the case.
أحمد تعال
Amnesty International and Save the Children moving forward in terms of support they give to refugee camps in countries like in European countries, in Greece and in Turkey. Alaistair?
Yes, I can't speak for Amnesty International, but I can for Save the Children on this. I went to Lesbos back in November, December time, and I've been fortunate or unfortunate to travel to different places around the world during my career, and seen some pretty grim things, would be fair to say. I think one of the things that I found utterly shocking about Lesbos was that it's a holiday island. The hotels around that island are ones designed to go for sort of resort package holidays. It's a 4-hour flight away. It's really very nearby. And yet, every single day, at that time, 1,500 refugees were arriving on the beaches every day, in tiny dinghies, massively overcrowded. And people were arriving desperate just to reach land, desperate to find that safety that they've craved for so long, and that hope going forward. And I met there people who had arrived, and the system just wasn't very organised. It was really badly organised. It was people stood out in the rain for hours, for night after night as well. And it's just appalling conditions. It's truly appalling conditions. And this was back in November. Now, what's happened in recent weeks is the EU, as we referred to before, has made this agreement with Turkey. And this agreement basically says that from now on, anyone who's arriving into Greece from Turkey will be taken straight back to Turkey. And that the only way you can be taken into Europe is if it's through sort of arranged fronts going from Turkey in the first place. Now, a number of the aid agencies have suspended operations in Lesbos in reaction to this, and Save the Children is one of those. And the reason why we've done that is because we believe that the agreement that's been made is in breach of a number of international laws, particularly around the rights of refugees as well, and that if we were to continue supporting particularly what was becoming detention centres, we would be, in effect, backing that move that we saw as breaching a number of those laws. Now, we did that after a huge amount of consideration, because as you rightly pointed out, there's key essential services there, and what we've maintained is those essential services. Those services ensure people have the basic things they need to survive. And at the same time, we're advocating very strongly and very forcefully that this agreement needs to be changed, it needs to be ended, and that actually what is needed is a far bigger scale, far greater scale of ambition from European countries, one which isn't about saying no, but one which is about saying how can we help you the best, what can we do to transform your lives, how can we make sure that children are getting an education, getting healthcare, how can we make sure that people are protected as well. And to say that we were disappointed and angry at this EU-Turkey deal would be an understatement, and that we hope that we can change this going forward. But what we're seeing already is we're seeing increasing numbers of people travelling from Libya to Italy, which was the original route that was used quite heavily, particularly in the spring of last year as well. This isn't a crisis that you can just block off at one point. This is a crisis that will move and continue unless you address it properly, unless you address the root causes, including the conflict, including poverty and persecution in other countries as well, and that we find something far greater in ambition in helping support refugees from wherever they are, as well as other people who have been persecuted and forced from their homes.
قبل كنا حاسين إنهم بيدافعوا عنا، أما هلا ما عم يدافعوا عنا، هلا عم يقتلونا.
بس في يعني بس لاجئين هون ولا؟
إيه بس لاجئين هون.
ليش يعني عم يقصوا عم يقنصوا على المخيم؟
لأن تقاتلوا هن والدولة بلش تقاتلوا هن وداعش.
أي بلاد داعش دولة الإسلام.
Question for Alaistair. You said that one of the ways we can help is to make sure that more people see the movie. How are you making that happen? Is it available online or can people access a hard copy?
So how are we making the film more accessible to the public?
Good question, and one that I hope someone would ask. What we're doing is we're pulling together a pack which you'll be able to, I think, download. We're just in the process of making it now. And you'll be able to then sort of get access to the film. You'll be able to show it in your own home or sort of local community centre, stuff like that. It comes with a set of notes as well that helps explain the background to the film, what it's all about, and gives you a few talking points as well to help start a conversation as well. There's also sort of staff from Save the Children available and can come to sort of perhaps some sort of meetings if it's a bit bigger. I'm sure some of the other organisations here as well will be willing to sort of support that sort of initiative as well.
Yeah, if anyone's interested, if you could maybe leave a note on the table with the other actions and the sign-up sheet, and we'll definitely get in touch when arrangements are made. Yeah, I think we've got time for a few more questions, so... Sorry, I can't see.
This one just...
Yeah. Decide amongst yourselves.
How are the families that are being separated? The child in the film said the family were all over the place. How are they being reunited, and which organisations responsible for trying to find who belongs to who and get them back together when there are no communications and maybe no documents to prove who they are?
So which organisations are helping to reunite children with their families?
Yeah, the British Red Cross has a family tracing service, so they do a lot of work in terms of trying to reunite families together. Something from an international point of view.
From an international point of view, the UNHCR takes lead in doing a lot of this work. It's slow, and that's a big problem right now. One of the things we've been calling on the British government to do is to help speed up the process. So, for example, there's an agreement called, it's not very exciting name, Dublin 3. And that agreement basically is around family reunification. So if you are, for example, a unaccompanied refugee child who's arrived in Europe, but you have family who are in the UK, you have a legal right to be reunified with that family because that's the best place for that child to be. Now, at the moment, that process is extremely slow. And a lot of the work we've been doing is pushing for that process to be sped up. We got a partial win on that in January when the government announced that they were going to be sort of encouraging more of that. But it is slow at the moment. What we need to see is a greater sort of pace to that work. Citizens UK did some great work with 7 children who were in Calais, who were unaccompanied and had family in the UK, and managed to push them, push the government and push through the legal processes to get them reunified and sort of brought into the UK because they were seen as vulnerable and urgently needed that support. So that's happening, but that's one of the areas where we need sort of support from people like yourselves, writing to your MPs, writing to David Cameron, speaking out about this stuff, saying that if there's children who have family here in the UK and they are alone in Europe, they should be reunified with that family member.
Yeah. How and why should we put pressure on the government to solve this problem? How can we do it?
Well, I wanted to actually, I don't know how, because I've only been in Leeds for 6 months only. I don't know really much about politics here, so I'm trying to learn actually. But I wanted to also continue further from this point with the narrative again, because it does really just kind of distort how we understand the situation. For example, today it's been explained to us that the only reason that there's a problem in Syria is that civil war, as if Syrians are killing each other. It was mentioned that was sectarianism. The whole narrative of uprising that is not even mentioned. The political and civil rights is not even mentioned. So the whole question of ever since in 2011, 2012, people have been said in Syria that we can put it like the solution is by removing Assad. Today, it's been selling to us that Assad is the alternative to ISIS because ISIS is the evil and the only evil inside Syria, which is not the case. It has been documented by Amnesty International and by Human Rights Watch that Assad has committed most of the crimes inside Syria. So when you defect from that discourse and you end up with saying that it's an humanitarian crisis, that people are killing each other, there's an Islamic fanatics in Syria, and that's the whole case, you end up with a consequence that people are actually might be, and this is true. There's a campaign when it was started on Twitter that refugees are not welcome. That most of the narrative is that the refugees are affiliated to ISIS. So where did that narrative comes from? Because the media does not cover the demonstrations, the protests that has happened against ISIS and against Al-Qaeda inside Syria. What has been covering is that what ISIS has been done and what has been killing, so that it tells us that okay, this is the problem. ISIS is the evil. Let's talk about negotiations with Assad. Let's talk about how we communicate and negotiate and work with Assad in order to bomb ISIS. This is part of, I think, in my view, and this has always been the case, is that once the political discourse has been neglected, you end up with a distorted truth. And that's how I think my recommendation is not only to address the results, but also to go back. How did this start? To read the history, to communicate with Syrians, talk to the people who are working in the field in order to identify what are the challenges and how can we effectively respond to those.
Thank you. Alaistair or Abdou, do you have anything to add to that point?
It's complex, really. I think for us, because we're national, we're almost dealing with the consequences of the lack of action, if you like, and the consequences of that, distorted message that, from the media, really. So I guess, the response has to be political, but in practice, there are people coming here, there are people who need help, so I think we need, several approaches to that, but it needs an international response as well, and the pressure should be put, on the government to really be proactive. So I guess the suggestion about Alaistair, about contacting your MPs and, talking to your local MPs about, the film and what you've seen and your understanding of what's happening, in Leeds and how actually they should put pressure on David Cameron to do something about it. And the fact that he used the common side bunch of migrants doesn't really help, and actually it makes you think, is he really the best person to try and tackle this issue if he speaks that way? Because to me personally, it makes me think about children, young people, really. So we tend to see people in Calais, and people are judging whether they're children or not, whether they're lying about the fact they're under 18 or not. But it's vulnerable people coming because they flee, poverty. But poverty kills as well. We don't know what choice we would make in that kind of situation, really. So I think we just need to, like you said, understanding the roots of the problem and try and find positive solutions with it.
Yeah, I think I'll come back to some of what I said before, is we need to tell the real story of what's going on. And that involves sharing films like the one we've seen this evening, where you've got the voices of children sort of telling their stories, telling their experiences as well. I think that's one of the most powerful ways we can challenge our peers, our friends, our families, and ultimately challenge sort of political leaders to put pressure on to find that sort of solution that brings peace to Syria and brings hope to sort of those who've been displaced by the conflict.
Thank you. I think that's all we've got time for.
الذل كتير والمرض كتير الغرب قتلتنا سوريا بتضل أمل كبير.